Welcome to the Africa CEO Dialogue Forum. The theme for this evening, this afternoon, will be financial inclusion, emerging opportunities and challenges. And the webinar will be hosted by Strathmore University Business School. My name is Santina Benson, and I am the Executive Director of the CEO Roundtable of Tanzania, and I'll be moderating the discussion this afternoon. I'd like to give a warm welcome to all our distinguished panelists, our keynote speaker, Dr. James Mwangi, as well as all the participants who are joining this afternoon. Later on during the session, we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A session, and you can participate in this session by using the chat function at the bottom of your screens there. So we'll open that up later in the discussions. So without much ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. George Njenga, who is the Dean for Strathmore University Business School. Karibu, Dr. Njenga.
Santi, thank you, Santina. I'm using Swahili, but today we have 500 and more people registered for this session webinar. And they come from 20 countries in Africa. And we also have countries like the US, UK, Spain, Switzerland, India, Belgium, and Canada. I hope they'll manage to connect to all of you, and all CEOs are most welcome, and we hope to have a beautiful dialogue. All the team behind the scenes that has been working significantly on this, the team from SVAI, Tiki Bernard, the Shared Value Africa Initiative, and Angela Dunge, Dr. Angela Dunge, I just want to say how appreciative I am for all the work behind the scenes. Very well. So, dear CEOs, today we have the keynote address speaker, a gentleman who has made a mark and has transformed Africa. That is Dr. James Mwangi. I see you there, still with a serious face, has won global awards, my brother. And it's an honor to have you here, sir. Oh, what a precious thing. We go a long way because James was one of those who trusted in the impact of good universities and especially good business schools, because he was among the first executive fellows of Strathmore Business School, Strathmore University Business School. James, it's a wonderful thing for you to be here. And that honor and trust you gave me many years ago, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. He is going to be the keynote speaker. Then with him, the discussants. I'll start not by rank. Peggy Sue Kumalo, that is the CEO, Standard Bank Wealth section, right? Peggy, that is it, from South Africa. That's very beautiful, and thank you very much for being here. That's a very key thing. All right.
Thank you.
Very, very.
Thank you.
Then the other guy who you may not know him, but he has been a significant person who has invested all his life in transforming professionals and businesses in Africa. Dr. James Boyd McPhee, to whom I also owe very many things in my life, and I say thank you for you being here. It's very kind of you, Jimmy. Okay. We have Santina Benson, who's going to take care of us, the advisor in Tanzania, one of the advisory board members. We have Toyin Sani. It's nice to see you, the CEO of Emerging Africa. You have a lot to tell us about what you think of Africa. So fantastic. We have very many other people who will join us, and I recognize those people who will contribute to the discussion today, whom Santina will make you know. But now I want to dwell a little bit, just for a few seconds, on Tiki Bernard, the CEO of the Shared Value Africa Initiative. A few months ago, we decided that it would be good for us to join hands and especially develop the shared value impact in Africa. And she chose Strathmore University Business School. And so we have been working as partners since then to develop the Pan-African CEO Network. And we hope to transform it. We are asking you CEOs to think about it, to to really think of how we can build a network for shared value. And sitting behind the scenes and thinking a lot about the impact equation is Tiki Bernard. I also want to add two little things: that we have a global CEO program. We are working with our colleagues in IESC Business School and in Yale University in the United States. And this will mainly be to build the next level of CEOs in Africa and to apprentice CEOs, which we are already doing in Tanzania, thanks to people like Santina. We're also doing that in Uganda with the CEO Forum and in Rwanda. But we need to go beyond those three countries and start building this Pan-African CEO network to dialogue about change, to dialogue about integration and so on and so forth, and growth and inclusive growth, which is our topic today. But finally, I want to say that Strathmore University Business School and SVI, Shared Value Africa, are very interested in this question of women CEOs. We know that you're not more than 5% of the CEOs in Africa, properly speaking. You haven't even reached the level of 10% of CEOs. So we are taking a great initiative through our leadership, Women in Leadership Center here, led by Angela, to start developing entrepreneurs and CEOs amongst the women, as with a special emphasis to give it a special place in developing Africa. And with that, I hand you over to my colleague and partner, Tiki Bernard.
Thank you, Dr. George, and afternoon, everybody. As always, I love being here, and I want to thank Strathmore University Business School once again for this partnership. I think, Dr. George, we spoke about it about 15 months ago, and we've made it reality. And for me, I also would like to share with you today that we've worked with Strathmore Business School, and we've co-created a shared value executive course that we will be delivering at the end of September this year. And really, if you want to be, and Dr. George talking about, you know, gender equality, which is something that's very, very close to our heart. You know, if you want to become an organization that truly wants to make a difference, you know, the shared value executive course with Strathmore Business School would really be worth something to attend. So just a little bit of a step back, if I may, for those of you that are not 100% familiar with who we are. So the Shared Value Africa Initiative is a Pan-Africa organization, and we are the regional partners of the Global Shared Value Initiative that was started by Professor Michael Porter and Mark Kramer from Harvard Business School. We advocate, we lobby, we influence, and assist business to adopt the shared value business management concept. And I think when Dr. George and myself started engaging probably about, I think it's about 2.5 years or 3 years ago, you know, when we said we really want to make Strathmore the center of the shared value knowledge base that we're going to build in Africa. And I think for me, it's very important because we are building a wonderful database with the CEO dialogues, and it's now up to us as business to take up that responsibility to actually see how we can further influence, you know, creating, you know, a better social impact on our beautiful continent. So today we're discussing something that is also extremely important, which is financial inclusion. You know, and Dr. George, for me, it's something that I know we're not going to eradicate poverty unless we have financial inclusion. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, you know, and even though mobile drove financial inclusion in sub-Saharan Africa, we still have 350 million unbanked individuals, you know, and the World Bank estimates that up to 95 million unbanked adults in the region receive cash payments for agricultural products, and roughly 65 million save using semi-formal methods. So I just say to every single CEO out there, therein lies the business opportunity. So we have to go out there and we need to make it happen. Financial inclusion due to COVID-19, we know, is now even more important than ever before, not only from an economic recovery, but also if we want to make a success of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we need to get rid of government and institutional barriers that impede people or businesses from reasonable and affordable access to basic financial services. And I always want to say, this is Africa. We need to do it differently, and we can. So I want to hand over to Santina, and in closing, I just want to say, we need to make financial services available, accessible, affordable to all segments of the population on our continent to create the Africa we want. And I thank you once again, Dr. George, for this wonderful relationship that we have with Strathmore. And over to you, Santina, and looking forward to hearing Dr. James talk and the panel discussion as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tiki, for that overview in terms of where we are in terms of financial inclusivity. So really helping set the stage as well. Thank you, Dr. Njenga, for the welcome remarks. I think you've given us some insights into our distinguished panelists, as well as into our esteemed keynote speaker, who I will be introducing today. I think Tiki also really helped set the stage by highlighting that wherein we find challenges, that is really where the opportunities lie. And I know that we will hear much deeper insights from Dr. James Mwangi in his keynote. So without much ado, I'd like to welcome him officially. Dr. Mwangi, as you know, is the Group Managing Director and CEO of Equity Group Holding PLC. He's also the Executive Chairman for Equity Group Foundation. As we heard Dr. Njenga also mention, he is one of the most renowned thought leaders within the Pan-African space and globally. And he has led Equity to become an integrated financial services group operating in 6 African countries with a client base of over 14 million. I don't know if I can do much justice with those few words, but Dr. Mwangi, karibu sana for your keynote address.
Thank you very much, Santina, for having me on this conversation. And I want, from the onset, to thank Dr. Njenga for finding me worthy to provide the 20 minutes speaking slot, and more so to identify myself with what Tiaki has just said. I want to really own everything he has said so that I can save a few minutes instead of repeating what she has said. And then recognize the panelists, and particularly McPhee, who taught me when I was in my early 20s. He was my teacher at Strathmore High School, where I did my accounting classes. Having said that, because of time, let me try and address myself to the subject of financial access and financial inclusion. I'm very passionate about this subject. Like Tiakia, I would lead a champion it because I'm a believer that financial access or finance is what oxygen is to a body or to the commercial world. We are living in a commercial world, and really what oxygenizes the commercial world, what allows economic activities to take place is access to finance. And access to finance then it becomes a stimulus for economic activities. It allows individual dreams to play out on the economic platform, either in terms of economic activities, or even more importantly, it allows velocity of transactions as a medium of exchange, where transactions and value of what is exchanging is defined substantially in finance. So when you then talk about a bulk of the world being excluded, it then means that we are denying the majority of excluded people from being empowered or being financed to actualize their dreams. All of us have dreams, and all our dreams are valid, but the dreams that become true are the ones that are supported, and dreams and aspirations are supported by financial resources. So exclusion from financial access means condemnation and people being condemned to their present status. They are not able to make further progress because they can't make their dreams come true. They are denied from expanding their opportunities because they can't have access to the economic opportunities within society. And once you are excluded from financial access, it then, to a great extent, means you are excluded even socially. It's a social condemnation to this current social status that you enjoy. It's also exclusion from many other aspects of life. And so I'm a strong advocate of financial inclusion. Financial inclusion doesn't mean channels. I'm a strong believer that mobile is a channel, is not a financial product. It's an enabler of money transfer. It's an enabler for payment, but it's not a financial product itself. The financial products are best defined when we talk of savings inclusion. People have access to a saving product. People have access to a credit product, and you can talk about credit inclusion. The people have an insurance product, then we can talk about insurance inclusion. People have access to digital payments, then we can say their digital payment included. And essentially, they have an opportunity for an investment. And then we can say their investment included. So financial inclusion is not about one product. It's about an entire suite of financial products that complement and completes the fulfillment of people's dreams and aspirations. We all want to save. We all want to access liquidity. We all want to have a lifestyle that is enabled particularly through payments. And we all want to save for us in the day through investment. That is what financial inclusion is. And it's an entire access to the entire suite of financial products. If you look at currently worldwide, the biggest exclusion happens in the micro, small, and medium enterprises, where when you look at the entire gap in access, it's about 8.9 trillion US dollars, which is literally 29% of the GDP of emerging markets. That is the level of exclusion when we analyze it. Exclusion then means that, for instance, if we come down to the commercial world, if we are excluded from access to finance, you are also excluded from credit reference bureaus. Again, there is no history of you. The credit, there is now, you are not recognized essentially in terms of recognition in the financial world. So essentially, beyond access to finance, I'm a strong advocate for financial literacy or financial education in definition of inclusion. Most societies from emerging markets are migrating from peasantry economies to commercial economies. And it will be naive to assume somebody who was born in peasantry economy would defeat and learn in a competitive commercial world or financial world. We need to take those people through financial literacy so that we can up their skills and competencies to be able to navigate and swim within the commercial financial world. That to me is a great measure of what financial inclusion is. And that is what I think Tiaki called capacity of the people. People must have the capacity to navigate in an inclusive world. There are a couple of challenges that we still go through for exclusion. And the biggest challenge is sustainability. There are many models that we have seen. There are quite a lot of, I remember when I honed my knowledge in the financial world, it was the days of microcredit. And quickly people realized that was not a sustainable model because credit alone is not sufficient. Wealth creation is not a function of credit, it's a function of saving. And so it was a long model that the world followed for a long time. The second biggest challenge that we really have to contend with is what the fourth revolution, industrial revolution talks about. The issue of technology, the issue of big data, the issue of scoring engines, the issue of machine learning, the issue of analytics. Once people are excluded from the fourth industrial revolution, because we don't have data on them, because they don't do payments, they're excluded from payments, they don't save, they're excluded, then essentially what it means is that they will not be recognized in the artificial world. There will be people who are faceless in the commercial world, in the sense that when you seek their data, nothing comes up because there is nothing. So it is very important for us to recognize that we need to ensure that there is digital inclusion of everybody after they have had access, so that they become part of the fourth industrial revolution. I want illustrate to speak a little bit about COVID and how much challenge it is. COVID has wiped out 12 trillion of the world GDP. To a great extent, the most affected are people living in informal sectors. What we have done then is to impoverish people even more. And consequently, there is need not only to make people at the lower ends of society or the bottom of the pyramid have urgent access to finance so that they can reconstruct their lives. Otherwise, we'll widen the gap between the rich and the poor, and we'll marginalize the poor even more, because the little they had because of disruption of lockdowns, they have been condemned to a life where they are not actively engaged in economic activities and earning, and they are currently consuming what the little they had. And consequently, unless we create stimulus in access to finance to them, then it will be very difficult for them to rebuild their lives. And of course, the other challenge that we can't ignore is the power of technology. Technology has disrupted and created a crowd of winners because of aggregating wealth. And we know today the top 10 largest companies in the world are controlling a sizable size of the global economy. And when you look at the owners of the 10 companies, they're just a few very gifted technology innovators. So the issue of technology, aggregating wealth and aggregating economic activities to the disappointment or to the exclusion of everybody else is something we really need to look into. And of course, the big techs have disrupted the world in a big way and consolidated and aggregated everything to platforms. And the question is, what will be the impact of platforms in a world? Will they create greater inequalities? And of course, as an African working from Africa, I can't close without talking about demography. In Africa, we have a mean age of 19 years, suggesting we have a very youthful population. So youth inclusion would be very central. Otherwise, we are setting ourselves to a social disorder where we exclude then, the majority because of the demographic shape, particularly in Africa. So as we think about financial access, financial inclusion, let's make youth the center of our conversation, that they are included, essentially the solutions we can have there, of course, is ensuring micro-enterprises, innovators, innovation hubs are all part of what will be accessible to finance. And as we do that, then we also think about technology, enabling them either as innovators, so then we can start distributing the aggregation and decorporatizing big techs and decorporatizing technology, like with the way we decorporatized multinationals in Africa with large enterprises, medium enterprises, small enterprises, micro enterprises, giving everybody a chance to play in the economic landscape. To me, that is what financial access would mean, the challenges that it confronts, but also know that one of the biggest promise is the UN Strategic Development Goals, the advocacy and embrace of that. This upside of COVID is that it has given us an opportunity to rebuild the world afresh. And the question is, can we rebuild the world with purpose first? And the primary purpose I would put ahead of all others is inclusion, whether it's financial inclusion, whether it's digital inclusion, whether it's social inclusion. The essence of rebuilding the world afresh should be inclusion, leaving nobody behind and marginalizing nobody, so that we can have a more sustainable world. And financial inclusion and financial access can play a very significant role to us as a generation who have had the privilege or misfortune, if whichever way you look of it, of learning lessons from the COVID experience, that none of us was safe, and life is as precious for me as it is for those in the informal center. And hence, let's create a stable, inclusive world where nobody is left behind. And the private sector, the commercial world, needs to lead this by ensuring we put in the NDA or the DNA of the private sector inclusion at the center and the heart of everything we do. Becoming conscious, socially conscious, and believing in the theme of shared prosperity, such that each of us have skin in the game and hence care and protect the larger good. I want to stop there and say how grateful I am to have been allowed to add my voice to this great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. James, for that insightful keynote. You've really maybe challenged us as well this afternoon to think deeper. Maybe as I proceed to welcoming the panelists to give their reactions to your keynote, I think one of the things that you've really left us with here today for us to dialogue deeper on and think deeper on, rebuild the world with purpose, which means inclusion and leaving no mind. In a post-COVID environment, how do we all harness and believe in the idea of shared value? Thank you so much, Dr. James. So I will start to welcome our panelists, but I'd like to start off with introductions, please. First, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Soyin Sani, who is an acclaimed strategic leadership in the capital markets expert. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer of Africa Capital Group, and they undertake advisory, capital raising, trusts, and wealth management services. We also have with us on the distinguished panel, Ms. Peggy Sue Kumalo. Peggy Sue is the Chief Executive of Standard Bank's Wealth Division. in South Africa. She's passionate about creating equal opportunities for all South Africans through unlocking access to capital. And finally, but not least, we have Dr. James McPhee. Dr. Jim is a lecturer at Strathmore University Business School. He's also a director and the head of the board audit committee of SBM Bank Limited and the chairman of Sassini PLC, amongst his many accolades that he has. Just speaking to what Tiki had said during the introduction, it's interesting to a very evenly distributed panel. 50% gender balance, I believe, because Dr. Mwangi will be joining the panelists shortly in the Q&A session. So well done to Strathmore as well as Shared Value Initiative for that gender balance. Just to remind the participants that as you have questions, you can actually use the Q&A function. There's a chat function and a Q&A function. Please be sure to use the Q&A function for your questions. And as I highlighted, Dr. James will be joining the panelists as part of the Q&A discussion. So you'll have the opportunity to raise questions to him directly as well. So now I'd like to welcome the panelists to react to Dr. James' keynote. And I would like to start with Ms. Toyin Sani. Karibu, as we say in Tanzania. Welcome to deliver your reactions, please.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank the Strathmore Business School for this initiative, and I particularly appreciate the topic, which is financial inclusion and examining the challenges and opportunities for our financial markets across Africa. I want to congratulate Dr. James Mwangi, who is a highly respected and renowned operator in this space, on that excellently delivered and very thought-provoking presentation. And to say that I have been greatly enlightened in the few minutes that I have listened to you, sir. And for me, the part of his presentation that resonates the most is the fact that COVID-19, though painful, and as most change opportunities are, though very painful and costly to the entire world, gives us an opportunity to rebuild our world. And this world that we're rebuilding is a world in which we will leave nobody behind. I am thrilled at the opportunity to examine how we can ensure that women who have been significantly excluded economically and financially across the continent and across the world can then be better included in this new world. Looking at an opportunity to reclaim part of the over $12 trillion global wealth that has been lost or displaced on account of the inadequate inclusion of our women. I welcome his comments also about the imperative of including the youths. And I think the technology space offers a wonderful opportunity, because this is a space where, unlike every other area, the youth do appear to have a comparative advantage with the rest of the economy, especially if we can look at models that enable them to operate with the support of hubs, as have been suggested. I totally appreciate the differentiation between enablers and channels like mobile money and actual products. And I appreciate the very comprehensive range of products that have been mentioned and it cuts across all the different types of financial products. I would like to close at this preliminary stage by saying that I am going to be looking at the opportunities from the perspective of the capital markets, which is the space within which I play. A lot of the challenges before African markets that are responsible for the significant exclusion of the small and medium scale enterprises and our rural dwellers have to do with our significant infrastructure challenges across the region. These infrastructure challenges cut across road and transport infrastructure, and we are particularly vulnerable to this because, unfortunately, a lot of our markets are still heavily dependent on bricks and mortar, which obviously we need to change as we look at digital options. But power infrastructure, for example, remains critical, even for the switch to digital technology infrastructure. And so I think I see a huge opportunity for the capital market to capitalize development or to catalyze the development we need by providing technology, providing infrastructure, meeting the huge infrastructure gap across the region. And those are some of the opportunities I'll be talking about. And also capital market type products that can also drive the inclusion message, specifically with respect to investment inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Toyin, for that reaction to Dr. James' keynote. I'd like to welcome Ms. Peggy Sukumalo now to react to Dr. James as well.
Thank you so much, Santina. Good afternoon. Hello, Hambiri Zamchana, to everyone on the webinar, and also, to my distinguished and esteemed panel members. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Strathmore University for the opportunity and privilege to connect with you this afternoon. To Dr. Mwangi, thank you so much. I think that was very powerful. It was very thought-provoking and really great reflections. I think for me, as a female leader in financial services and recently having taken up the role of leading Standard Bank Group, the wealth business in South Africa for Standard Bank Group, is something that has really made me lean into thinking differently around how do we really make sure that we create businesses and opportunities that are inclusive and transformative across the different segments of our clients, in particularly for women. I think your reflections are very profound, especially around financial inclusion for the youth. Yes, definitely, we cannot leave them behind. But I also think for women in particular, it's something that needs to be top of mind, and it's something that we need to really lean into. I recently read a research piece that was done by New York Life Investments, which was published last month, where they said 33% of global wealth, last year was in the hands of women. And I think there's a real opportunity here that we're obviously going to see this powerful force continue to accelerate. And this could really create a watershed decade ahead for both women's wealth and wealth management as a whole. That is something that I focus on, and I think coming into the space, I've also taken the opportunity to make sure that we really move away from the traditional way of defining wealth and look at wealth really in a more inclusive way. When we think of wealth, everybody thinks of wealth in the form of being financially privileged or owning assets. And I truly believe that wealth is more about choices. It's about freedoms. It's about protecting things that matter most to us as people. And I've really brought that voice into the wealth business in South Africa to make sure that we really are inclusive and transformative in the way we bank our clients. But I also do believe that real change starts with opening a dialogue inside and outside our organizations where we find ourselves, and broadly in the communities as well, so that we can really share solutions that would lead to tangible commitments. If I could just highlight an initiative that we have undertaken as Standard Bank, where we've set up something called the African Women Leadership Fund. And this is an initiative that we are spearheading in partnership with the UN Economic Commission for Africa. We will be supporting Black female asset managers who will then have the mandate to invest in Black women-owned businesses across the continent. As you know, Standard Bank has a presence in 20 countries in sub-Saharan countries. And so we are hoping that we're really going to use our footprint to drive this initiative and make sure that we really bring women into the mainstream of financial services and really support women-owned businesses, because I think this is very crucial in terms of making sure that we include women and they form a bigger part of the economy. And I think in this time of COVID-19, we've also seen the role that has been played by women in financial services, where I think what makes women great leaders every day, whether it's showing compassion, being, showing humility, being collaborative. I think being collaborative is such an important aspect of what we need to do as communities, as leaders, to make sure that, we are able to take all our communities and different stakeholders with us on this journey of making sure that, financial inclusion really happens, and I think so many leaders before us have really, made a massive difference in this regard. So I think there are many steps on this journey, and we recognize that we do not have all the answers, but I think just based on your reflections, Dr. Mangi, we all need to be agents of change. And we all need to play a role in making sure that this change, really happens. I believe that business, should make sure that, we have a better place, and that, companies should become powerful platforms for social change. I think it's something that, we need to drive and make sure that we have a collective higher purpose to create a world where everyone has equal rights. Equal pay is something else that I think we need to look at when we're looking at women and the role of women in business. Access to education, I think you spoke about this. I think financial literacy and just financial education is something that we all need to drive and make sure that it happens, and it happens broadly, so that that whole principle of taking everyone with us as we rise, we need to lift. I think it's something that I really believe is important, that as we rise, we need to lift everyone with us. So that's something that I think we need to make sure that we are always leaning towards, and making sure that we create equal opportunities for everyone, especially young people, them coming into the different workplaces. Sometimes it's challenging. They come from different walks of life. And we all have had some form of mentorship in our lives. I have been mentored by great and influential leaders, and we need to make sure that we continuously, play a role in terms of mentoring and making sure that, young people have opportunities in the workplaces as well. I think more and more, leaders are obviously cultivating for equity and equality. And I think it's not just the right thing to do. I think it's a very important thing to do, and we all need to lean into that. But if we look at, financial inclusion, and I think it's been mentioned, we need more innovative approaches in terms of how we do it, and make sure that, we really take into account what are the needs when it comes to women, and are we really addressing and solutioning according to those needs. So it's something that, we need to really make. There's regulations, there's policy, frameworks, and those are a catalyst. But I do think that financial institutions need to work really hard and commit to making sure that, we work together with public and private sectors in making sure that, financial inclusion really happens broadly, and we take everyone with us. I think the issue around COVID-19 and just the impact of COVID-19 on the different sectors and different industries, I think there's been a massive impact on small business. We've seen it in South Africa, where, some businesses are really not going to have that opportunity to rebuild and start over again. They've had to really review and ask themselves some really hard questions in terms of, how do I then get an opportunity to renew and become a very different and pivot into something that is very different. And I think the concept, Dr. Mangi, around platform business is something that really is happening throughout different industries. We are thinking about it as well as an organization. And I think new business models and new technologies are allowing organizations to use data to generate, value in very different ways. And I think that COVID-19 has dealt the world a twin crisis. I think we are not only facing the greatest global health shock, but we also are facing the greatest economic shock. And I think we all have the opportunity to rebuild. South Africa is talking about, building a new economy that is inclusive. I think President Cyril Ramaphosa has said this so many times, that we need to make sure that when we build this new economy, that it's inclusive, that it's transformative, and that the young people of South Africa are at the forefront of co-creating and shaping that new economy. So I think, Santina, I will pause at this point.
Peggy Sue, thank you so much. You've given us a lot of insights as well as part of your reaction to Dr. James' keynote. We've heard a lot in terms of leading by example and actually taking some tangible, we see some questions coming in, like what can the private sector do more of? And I think you've already started to give us some examples of tangible solutions to address some of the problems and examples of what's currently happening in South Africa. So we'll delve a little bit deeper once we open up for Q&A and discussions with a full panel. But I'd now like to welcome the final panelists, Dr. Jim, to also make your to Dr. Mwangi's keynote. Karibu, Dr. Jim.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Santina. I think I'd be out of place if I didn't speak about women development. A year ago, I was actually talking to James Mwangi in Equity headquarters, and I told him that my best student was a young lady by the name of Stephanie Mwangi, and he said, "You bring her here." Well, she's actually, I made that suggestion to Stephanie. I said, "Look, Dr. James Mwangi is very, very keen that you go and work with Equity Bank." But she then chose to go and work with one of the big 4 firms. But I must tell you that my best students in Strathmore University here tend to be women. And if you go to some of the women's schools, I actually grew up in Kenya High School. My mother was a mathematics teacher there. My father had died when I was 6 years old, so my mother really was the person who brought me up. She was the maths teacher there. Now, Kenya High School last year was the #1 school in Kenya. We rank all of our schools in relation to their results in their Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education, and Kenya High was the #1 school. If you go to Kenya High, if you go to Alliance Girls, if you go to any girls' school which is of value in Kenya, all the young ladies listen to you. If you go to the men's schools, they all talk to one another. So that's one of the reasons why probably women are going to be ahead of men in the whole of Africa. But let me get back to COVID-19, which James was talking about. I was actually talking to a customer of Equity Bank. I had lunch with him last Sunday. And he actually brought up that he had been in one of the banking halls of Equity. And he told the teller there, "Look, there are very few people, in this hall. Are you still working, or is it COVID-19 or what?" And the person said to him, and I don't know how true this is, 93% of the banking transactions in Equity are actually online. And also I remember the last time, well, not the last time, but the previous time to that, when I met James up in Equity, he was mentioning about agency banking. Equity have an incredible number of agent banks, or banking agents, let's call them. And, that is a thing that has revolutionized banking in Kenya. But I'll let James, there is a question in relation to that. I'll let James deal with that. But he pointed out to me, because I'm an accountant and he's an accountant as well, and we're always looking at costs. And agency banking means that you don't have to put up bricks and mortar. You've actually got your person, your bank present in those places, and you just simply have a variable cost rather than a fixed cost. We are actually communicating with one another on Zoom, and Zoom was started by a group of young men who actually were working in Cisco. They found that Cisco was not really receptive to their ideas, so they started Zoom. And on Tuesday evening, that is 2 days ago, on NASDAQ, Zoom is not quoted on the New York Stock Exchange, but it is quoted on NASDAQ, as is Microsoft and Apple and many of these IT companies. But their shares were trading, they'd gone up 47% on Tuesday to $478 a share. And that is a 340% year-to-date growth from the previous year. So you can see, you know, why I talk about Zoom. I think it's very, very important. Here in Kenya, I think it's also the case in South Africa, and it's also the case in Nigeria. But the rest of Africa, we have to understand it. In Kenya, certainly, we have many young people who are incredibly good with IT. And this is something that we've got to try to really promote. And I feel that, you know, for example, the whole thing of the outsourcing industry, it's something that India earns as much from outsourcing as our whole GDP in Kenya. It's an industry that has passed us by because we just did not get into this fast enough. South Africa has done so. Mauritius has done so. North Africa, a number of countries there have done so. But we have not done so in Kenya. And you know, one of the things that Tiki was talking about, you know, I had a classmate in St. Mary's where I was here, and his father was a farmer in Eldoret, but his name was Roger Barnard. So Tiki, you know, I know that name very, very well. Maybe you're related to Roger in some way, but you were talking about lobby. And what I feel is that this is something that CEOs in Africa have got to do much more than what they are doing. And the reason why is that so few people in government understand business. I was talking yesterday morning to a man who had gone into a county, let me not mention the county, but it's near Mombasa. He said, look, I want to put up low-cost housing in this, you really need it in this county. The person in charge of the county, the governor, said, will you begin by giving me 1 million shillings? It's not a lot of money, it's $10,000, okay, but, you know, well, the fellow just walked out the door. Now, you see, we also have a situation where, you know, there is a mining company in Kajiado County here in Kenya. They were given a tax bill. You haven't paid rates of 18 billion shillings. That is, in fact, $180 million. Now, that is the value of the company. So, you know, Teki, you were talking about lobbying, and it's incredibly important that we try to lobby governments. You know, we in Kenya, our government is talking about an enabling environment, but you know, it isn't an enabling environment. In reality, it's not on the ground. You know, if you go back to 1990 in South Africa, manufacturing was 24% of GDP. It was one of the highest in the world. Today, it is 13% of GDP. And in our own case, if you go back to 2014, this was our high year. No, it was a little bit earlier. We had 14% GDP was manufacturing. Today it is 8%. Why? Because we can't compete with China. When the South African government removed taxes on steel coming from China, 4 steel companies closed. Only one was able to continue to operate in South Africa. There was an investor here in Kenya. He's setting up a steel making factory in Mombasa. And I said, look, are you ready? Are you able to compete with the Chinese? And he explained to me how he was going to be able to. But you see, I have past students who are running their businesses, manufacturing. Today, they've stopped manufacturing. They go to China, buy the goods there, and bring them into Kenya. We have a German company which has been totally unaffected by COVID-19. It employs 4,000 people in Thika. This company is moving to Ethiopia. And the reason why it's moving to Ethiopia is that it needs to import quality products from India, but it can't do so because there are all sorts of tariffs, but it can get those goods, but they're not the same quality from China. Now, admittedly, Unilever earlier this year was transferring the stuff that is used to make detergents from Nairobi to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. It cost 5 times what it cost to bring those goods from China to Addis Ababa. So, you know, one of the things that I feel that here in Kenya, we've got to try to use this opportunity. You know, we're saying that 1.7 million people have lost their jobs in Kenya as a result of COVID-19. And as you point out, it's going to be quite difficult for the economy to recover. But I think what we've got to do in Kenya is we've got to think about competitiveness. I always talk about Kenya as Kenya Incorporated, Kenya as a company. We are competing against Singapore. Why? Because Singapore is a financial center, and we're trying to develop Nairobi into a hub, similar to South Africa, Johannesburg. But you see, the point here really is, if we don't have this idea at the very top of the country, it's so easy to say, yes, we've got an environment which is conducive to business. No, we don't, because the reality on the ground, I was having lunch with a person today, and he said, you know, if you go to Thika, the factories there have a wall which is 6 meters tall. And this friend of mine was talking to this guy from Thika, and he said, well, that's to keep out the burglars. He said, no, it's to keep out the Kenya Revenue Authority. So, you know, we have to understand that Kenya, that Tanzania, that Ethiopia, that the rest of Africa, we are competing against India. We're competing against China. We're competing against Vietnam. Vietnam is the second largest producer of coffee in the world. I have a young man, James Murithi. He was in Boston late last year. And the people there told him, they said, look, Kenya is no longer regarded as a coffee growing country. We used to produce 150,000 tons of coffee a year. We now produce 38,000 tons. Why? Because the farmers are being shafted by middlemen all the time. Unless we change this, we are not going to compete against the world. We have to be aware of this. You know, people do work really well in China. I could go on for a long, long time about that. But unless we do our work as well as they do, we're not going to make the mark which we can make. Because, you know, for example, the whole thing of agency banking, the whole thing of mobile banking, for example, we've just had figures this morning, okay, that more than $4 billion changed hands on the mobile banking system in the month of June this year. Sorry, in the month of July. More than $4 billion, up from $3.1 billion in June. So Dr. Njoroge, the governor of the Central Bank of Kenya, on Wednesday last week, he said that more than 80% of Kenyans are actually using mobile money. So financial inclusion is very, very wide in Kenya. And it can be the same. I think it's even equal to that in Tanzania. Very often in Kenya, we say, Tanzania. I was talking to a young man, a student of mine, he's actually in Arusha. And well, you know, things are going, for example, if you take East African breweries in Kenya, in the first 6 months of this year, consumption was down 37%. In Uganda, it was down by 21%. In Tanzania, where President Magufuli said this COVID-19 is an invention of the Chinese and the Americans, and I would agree with President Magufuli kabisa. But, you know, in Tanzania, their turnover went up by 10%. So, you know, is this a plan by some people to destroy the economies of the world? I don't know. But, you know, the only thing is we have to try to lobby our governments. You know, here in Kenya, I remember I was in a conference before we introduced we now have county governments. And there's a very clever young man, Kwame Owino is his name. He's the head of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Nairobi. And he asked this member of the committee of experts, how do we pay for all of this? And the answer was, well, the counties will generate their own economic resources. But you know, now we're thinking of introducing a new level of government, regional government. And what are those people going to do? Nothing. But they cost the one inch of this country. The people of this country have got to pay for that. And so, you know, I was talking to a past student the other night, and she was actually saying, well, look, you know, all these taxes are collected. How much actually is used to do what it's meant to do? How much of it is stolen? So, you know, when we talk about lobbying, we have to see ways by which there are proper constraints on people in power. We have a very bad example. If you are a parliamentarian in Kenya, you're in for 5 years, you lose your parliamentary seat, you'll get a pension of $1,000 a month for the rest of your life. When I was in Scotland doing my PhD, they started the Scots Parliament. The first thing those MPs did was to raise their salaries from £2,000 a month to £4,000 a month. And this is why I say, democracy, is it a great thing? I would prefer that we go back to what we had in our tribal system in Kenya, that we have a body of elders who's going to govern without being elected by the people in the slums of the cities of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to see that COVID-19 has created opportunities for people. And we've got to be aware of the fact that we have to try to use every possible means to exploit those opportunities, and yet let young men and young women get into IT so that we can actually expand our area of operation in those areas. Sorry to talk so much. I talk too much. I apologize to all of you for that.
Not at all, Dr. Jim. Thank you so much for those thought-provoking insights. I know we'll delve deeper into that as we open up the panel discussions and Q&A as well. And we'll now really start commencing with engaging with our panel. But before we do so, I'd like to welcome Tiki back, because I think one of the questions we see coming up from our attendees is, what exactly is the idea of shared value and shared prosperity? And I know Peggy Sue touched on this a little bit, but I think it will be beneficial to the full panel and the discussions thereafter if we can have a real understanding in terms of shared value and shared prosperity. Tiki, can I give you the floor just to give us some deeper insights on that, and then we'll have the panel discuss thereafter.
Thank you, Santina, for this opportunity. I won't take too much of your time. So I think when we look at COVID-19, there's been no clearer demonstration of how inextricably business and society is linked. Because without a healthy society, business cannot operate. Without a healthy business, society cannot survive. And that's where we're saying, from a shared value perspective, it's a business strategy that's designed to solve social issues profitably. So it's not corporate social investment. It is not corporate social responsibility. It is about doing business differently in a way the rest of the market is not. So to create shared value, a company must transform its business model into a self-resourcing value creation model. where it's designed to solve social challenges through business itself. So and this is what we always say from a shared value perspective, we've got the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. 16 of them is about social and environmental issues. So what business have to do is identify that social issue that's holding your business back. What is holding your business back? Identify the social issue and build the business case around it. So shared value policies and principles can be adopted by governments, by non-profits, but and by the private sector. So what we're saying is that shared value is the way to create economic value and to create value for society. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain it a little bit. I can talk about it the whole afternoon, but I'm dying to hear what the panel is going to be talking about this afternoon. Thank you, Santina.
Thank you so much, Tiki. And I think you've clearly made a notable clarification there. And I think it's for businesses to note, because we are getting this question, what exactly does shared value mean? So it's moving away from CSR, corporate sustainable responsibility, and really focusing on sustainability, which means businesses are still profitable. And I think that's a very important distinction to have as we progress with the dialogue this afternoon. So one of the things that we wanted to really draw out of this discussion really is financial inclusion is such a broad subject. And thank you to our keynote speaker as well as our panelists for really diving deeper into some of the key elements that we sort of need to bring out this afternoon. So we've heard about the importance of bringing the informal sector into the formal sector and really addressing those who have been left behind traditionally, which are the youth and the women. We've also talked about the importance of digitization and how that can be harnessed to really help address and really plug some of the gaps that we're seeing. And we've also heard about some of potentially the opportunities for trade facilitation. I know Toyin, you mentioned about more of the challenges, but I know we'll dig deeper into the opportunities. So with that, I'd really like to really bring it back to Peggy Sue, because I think one of the key issues that you've raised is really how businesses can start targeting some of the issues that we have here. We have some questions that are already coming from our attendees. So this one for you, Peggy Sue, is how can women in Africa actually leverage on these collaborations for inclusive finance that are full of choices and freedom away from the traditional definition of wealth-based assets, especially when supporting organizations like banks, which offer credit? Will they pay attention to assets? So Peggy Sue, if I can really ask you to address that question, please.
Thank you, Santina. Look, I think, the adoption, usage, and sustainability of financial services is generally linked to socioeconomic development. And I think bringing in more people into the financial system, has the ability to enhance GDP growth, reduce poverty, create new markets, opportunities, for the private sector. And I think for me, for women to leverage, I think obviously there's a lot of challenges when it comes to access to credit and just financial inclusion. A lot of it has to do with mistrust, lack of knowledge, not understanding, how the banking system works. And I think, speaking to the point around financial education and just the focus and really the big drive that we need to all, partner on and make sure that we drive financial education to make sure that people understand when they are engaging with financial services, what does that mean? And when it comes to, women leveraging some of the opportunities that sit within, financial services, I think one of the biggest barriers and stumbling block is obviously, collateral. If you have a business and you want to take a credit loan or a loan, what collateral do you have? Paperwork, there's certain things that you get asked. And sometimes if you're in the informal sector and you're really trying to just make ends meet, but you're running a really thriving business as a woman, the banks are asking you for your pay slip, your bank statements. And generally, people don't have all of this information. And so it's about how do we then innovatively come up with solutions that will make sure these barriers do not become stumbling blocks and really exclude women from having access to, to credit or capital for running their businesses. And I think, increasingly, in this age of digital innovation, it's just how do we then come up with different platforms that women can tap into to make sure that they can actually access capital. And I think there's also been several studies across the globe, across industries, where research has really, or empirical evidence has really shown that women or female entrepreneurs have a better risk profile for business loans. And it's how do we as financial services really tap into that, because female-owned businesses have a better repayment rate and lower default rates. And I think it's got to do with just women. I think we're very honest, in many interactions that we hold. And so when we also take into the realm of doing business, we make sure that we are honest. We're very conscious around how the community around us perceives us, how we show up, how we cement ourselves in these different spaces. And so I think evidence is there to make sure that, women are really can have access to credit, and their portfolios really reflect that, they don't really run into issues where you start having non-performing loans. I think it's much lower for female-owned businesses. And I think we really need to make sure that, the use of technology becomes a crucial, sort of role, or plays a crucial role in shaping or redefining the economic and social systems that women find themselves in. And I think making sure that, there's, the new business models, the new technologies really allow organizations to use data, to generate solutions that, will really drive the prosperity and fulfillment of women and women-owned businesses, and how they become quite, big players in the industry. And I think even if you look at it from a wealth perspective, like I said earlier on, I think they are becoming a new frontier. A new frontier is emerging, and that is women really building their wealth and becoming more risk-taking, in their undertakings in business, and just in terms of having trusted advisors around them and building and preserving their wealth.
Thank you very much, Peggy Sue. I'd love to bring Dr. Mwangi back into the discussions. There's quite a number of questions really focused on the youth. So we touched on the importance of ensuring the youth are part of the financial inclusion model. We have a question that talks about policies. How can the public and private sectors work together to address and ensure good transparency of policies and procedures, which can be enforced in emerging sectors like the DRC Congo, and for the benefit of youths, really? Dr. Mwangi, Dr. James, can I ask you to address this question, please?
Thank you very much for an excellent question. I think inclusion of youth, and particularly also women, will require, as Professor McPhee said, lobbying, so that we have a smart regulation that allows digital financial access and inclusion. Three aspects will be very important. Regulation must be appropriate and enabling. The second aspect is the how. The channel must be friendly and provide ease and convenience to youth, and we couldn't get it better than digital infrastructure for financial access. And then banks and financial service providers across the whole spectrum must be very responsive to come as with products that are tailor-made for young people. They must be responsive. They can't be tied to securities that young people don't have. They must be tied to concept, to ideas, to business plans, and tied to cash flows. So we must move away from the traditional lending models that were very dependent on physical securities, to concepts, to the business model itself, and potential cash flows that can be generated. And lastly, the problem, the enterprise that is sponsored by the young people is sponsoring. Enterprises by youth should address society's problem. Essentially, we always talk about opportunities, but the greater the challenges, like we have in Africa, the greater the opportunities. Enterprises would be responsive if they focused on solving this problem. The bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. So that's how I would look at it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mwangi. Maybe a follow-on question to that. Looking at non-traditional models of inclusivity. In your estimation, do you feel that the private sector as a whole is ready to adopt these non-traditional models? In a post-COVID-19 era, do you think this has been what has needed to happen to sort of mobilize us and incentivize us? Or do you think there needs to be more in terms of leading by example, and how do we start?
I think COVID movement has been a defining movement in the sense that we have all woken up to the reality that is confronting us. And new knowledge and information has come to the table that we can't choose to ignore. And essentially, private sector, for its own survival, would of necessity respond to COVID. As Professor McPhee was saying, if we look at equity, yeah, we had a head start. We had invested heavily in technology, but we accelerated that with COVID. And now 98% of all our relationship with the customers are on online platform. 83% of them are being on a mobile platform. We have responded to the health protocols of people staying at home, people not touching services. So we realized our ATMs would be inappropriate to offer to our customers. So we reverted to the keyboard of our customers' mobile phones and other devices. And essentially, we gave people an opportunity to have access to banking 24 hours, wherever they are, and with an opportunity to comply with all the health protocols. In the process, what we have seen is that to be able to provide things like loans, then we had to quickly digitize most of the back-end processes of the bank. And that is a sign of how responsive the private sector can. So today, 87% of all our loans are now being accessed from the mobile platforms. And it's not just the traditional payroll loans. We are now talking about micro, small, group lending, all that is being put on the platform to enable the wider public, and particularly the youth, to have access to this. But that is also being enabled by embracing, which we can't fail to embrace, the fourth industrial revolution, the issue of big data. Youth who are uncomfortable to come to the branches, you're able to understand them if you give them payment devices. You start understanding them from a lifestyle perspective because they fulfill and enable their lifestyle through payments. Then you look at their transactioning model. Then you look at their transaction fruit. They don't save. It's the transaction fruit. They haven't reached that level of long-term savings. So you look at how their fruit behaves and how it is applied, and then their borrowing behavior. Then you look at their social networks and look who they relate to and try to understand them better from their friends and the activities that they engage throughout the day. And essentially, then you start building models that are responsive to them based on big data, based on analytics, based on machine learning. Then that gives you a feel and an experience of youth, and you understand them and you're able to respond to their needs. And I
Santina,
guess
I wonder if I could add something to what James said there. Just a couple of
Absolutely,
things.
Dr.
You know, annual general meetings in Kenya, that is, of companies quoted on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, are a bit of a messy thing. And if, for example, you take Safaricom, at one point in its life, Safaricom had 1,200,000 retail investors as members of the company. That number is reduced substantially now. But annual general meetings could not be held because of COVID-19. They couldn't be held physically. So what we started doing in Kenya was to use Zoom and other modalities to actually have these annual general meetings. They're a pretty sophisticated system. Now, for example, if you take Safaricom used to rent a stadium, which is a football stadium, and they would have their annual general meeting there, and they'd have 5,000 people attend it. This year, they did it online, and they had 80,000 members attending the annual general meeting. So that means, you see, that obviously, well, the feeling a little bit in Kenya is, let's not ever go back to the physical annual general meeting, because number one, you have to transport your shareholders to that particular facility from the center of Nairobi or whatever. It's going to prevent people from the different towns in Kenya who have obviously got shares in the company to go and attend that annual general meeting. So this is something that has been made very, very much easier because of our need to do this online. Secondly, if you have a look at the prudential guidelines of the Central Bank of Kenya, 3 out of your 4 board meetings every year must be face-to-face. Now, this has gone by the board. That's a bad pun, but anyway, they've gone out of the window now, because all the meetings now are done online. So one of the things, you know, I mentioned this thing about the lobby thing. Our regulators very often don't realize that they are living in the Stone Age, and they've got to come and say, okay, now look, it is possible now to have these meetings online. They are exactly as effective as they would be if they were face-to-face. Just those 2 points, Santina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim. So I think I'd like to bring it back to Toyin. I know that you addressed some of the challenges that you have seen in the capital markets. I'd like us to maybe delve deeper into some of the opportunities. So you said traditional models have been dependent on brick and mortar, really. So what do you see as opportunities for widening that space, especially with entrepreneurs who are thinking outside the box, who are looking for new opportunities? And there's opportunities beyond their country borders. So when you're focusing on Pan-African trade, how do you see, first of all, the youth, women, but all those who have been challenged by access previously coming into the fold? So it's over to you. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Santina. So for me, one of the major opportunities that I see is that COVID-19 has shown us just how easy it is for us to engage with one another and to transact across borders. So at the beginning of this session, I mean, we got to know just exactly how many countries are represented and participating right now. So I see a huge opportunity for African financial sector providers that succeeded in achieving a high rate of financial inclusion. So the Equity Bank story, the Kenya story, having 80% of your transactions on digital models, I mean, is a huge opportunity for you to spread this kind of technology and this kind of development across the rest of Africa. Unfortunately, look at the population of Nigeria, and you find out that we are barely scratching maybe just over 7 million transactions on digital platforms, and you are talking about 150 million transactions in an economy that is smaller than our economy. Clearly, there's than now to look how level of penetration should be extended to other African markets. And Professor James hit the nail on the head when he talked about, unfortunately, the attitude of our regulators, who appear to still be in the Stone Age in terms of the artificial restrictions and the borders that they are putting they're putting as conditions for operations in some of our markets. A lot of these need to change. I do know that the Central Bank of Nigeria has increasingly welcomed agency banking and begun to look at a different approach towards mobile banking, but the penetration level is still very low. So I see an opportunity for cross-border expansion for operators across the region, for partnership and handshakes and collaborations with embedded operators in the different regions. I see an opportunity for acquisition of some of the fintech enablers that can, either acquisitions or collaborations with fintechs that can enable us to deepen the inclusion area. So those are some of the things that I think need to happen. I think that our more traditional players have seen their traditional businesses disappearing from right under their noses. They have seen that business can no longer be business as usual. They have seen clients that can no longer come physically to the banks even when they want to come. And they have seen, obviously, that the returns and the deposits that they took for granted can no longer come automatically under a COVID-19 situation. And even though the markets are opening up, I would like to believe that these are lessons that people know that you need to take advantage of the opportunity, because this could happen again. So I see a lot of opportunity for the lessons that we have learned and the models that have worked very well in some of the markets in Africa being replicated in other parts of Africa for a handshake, for collaboration between markets and operators.
Thank you very much, Toyin. I think maybe just a follow-on.
Could I just add something to there, Santina?
Absolutely, Dr.
Okay. Toyin, it's just that, you know, here on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, you probably know about it, but just in case you don't, they issued a loan, you know, treasury bills, which are taken up in very small amounts. The Central Bank of Kenya tried this a number of years ago, and the amount of paperwork that it incurred just made it impossible to continue. And then so the minimum amount that you can actually put into a normal treasury bill in Kenya is in fact going to be $1,000 or $500 if it's a long-term loan and so on. Now, the position is the Nairobi Securities Exchange, the people there, what they did was they decided, well, let's have a mobile T-bill, which you can actually invest as little as $30, $10 even. And the idea was to try to get what we call the mama mboga, the lady who's selling her vegetables on the street. In fact, it didn't actually work out too well, but it meant that they were able to raise $1 million using that particular platform. So it's a thing which I feel we should do right across the whole of Africa. Every country where there is a stock exchange. I know when I was doing my PhD, in fact, there was a country in Africa which had a stock exchange, but it had no companies quoted on the stock exchange. So, you know, it's like a fish market where you're not selling fish. But anyway, the position there is, I think that we've got to do that right across Africa, because we've got to get the small person, as James Mwangi was saying, we've got to encourage savings. If we can get people, we have to try to change the mind of people. I asked a class once, I want to expand my business. What do you do? Before the word do came out of my mouth, a student had said, get a loan. And, you know, well, we've got to save so that we can actually have money for that particular business. But this is a way by which it could be done everywhere in Africa.
I agree. I see opportunities for collective investment schemes, for example, that should be able to grow across borders. I see opportunities for crowdfunding platforms, for example, that should be able to grow across borders. Definitely, I think the fragmentation of our markets has worked against us. If there's ever a time for us to look at more integrated ways to deploy products and services across the continent, this will be the perfect time for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor McKee. And I think you have both raised some key issues that are coming out, so the whole mindset change, how do we get people to start changing their mindset in terms of repaying loans and as a way of really harnessing them, bringing them into the formal sector. And I think this also goes to access to information and having a bit deeper understanding of what financial inclusivity is. We heard all the panelists really touch on the importance of access to information. But I think it's something that maybe this is a question for all panelists, and I will start with Dr. James Mwangi, really to start digging deeper in terms of the idea of access to information. We know this is a huge bottleneck cutting across all the economies. How do we start to address this access to information? We have a specific question about smallholder farmers who want to access, especially being women, who want to access this credit but don't even know where to start. What are some of the models that businesses can adopt to address this significant gap? Dr. Mwangi, I'll start with you, but it's really a question for all the panelists.
I think as we move to a digital economy, access to information will stop being a problem because everything will have been digitized, and the digital platforms really collect a lot of information. What we really need to address may not be the what, because as we said, we now have developed capabilities of cloud computing, cloud access, we have big data, we have analytics, we have machine learning. So we learn about the farmers, and their trading, as we have seen, will start to come on platforms, markets that are online. Almost everything is going online. It's the era of internet of everything is almost with us and has been fast-tracked by the COVID experience. I think what will remain the biggest challenge, one is protection of data and the rights of data. As most people say, data is the next oil, but who will own that data mines? Who will be in control of data? Again, if we make a mistake and allow one or two people to aggregate data and they become the owners of data for everybody, then we will have a problem. I should own my data, and I should allow and lease my data for decision making, particularly when somebody wants to aggregate and build big data to be able to have insights from data. I should be leasing my data. I should be selling my data. So that aspect of, and that is what I was talking about, decorporatization to the individual level or to the personal level of technology, data, and particularly. The second aspect we need then to do is create legal frameworks that are protective of such data, such that it's not also abused and used for covert reasons or to be used against me as a barrier or to exclusion. And lastly is, of course, changing our policies and regulations. Most countries still have not recognized digital economies. They have not recognized digital signatures. So what is holding globalizing digitization is regulation, the policies that we have. So essentially, economies need to be motivated. And I think we'll keep on going back to McPhee's theory of lobby. We must lobby our governments because they have now become the hindrance, while they should be enablers. They should be really doing the policies that enable and create framework and give direction. At the moment, we are allowing the private sector to lead, and private sector come from the capitalist world. And we all know that a capitalism without a heart, a capitalism without a soul is not good for society. It's inconsistent with the shared prosperity like we have had. So it is imperative that government enter and sit on the driver's seat so that it creates a framework that are inclusive, frameworks that allows the private sector, as it does well, to do good into society, embed in the DNA of their operations, the good of society, recognizing and paying for the social license that allows them to operate once they get the license from their regulators. The society's license should not continue to be taken for granted. The Central Bank of Kenya gives me a license to do banking, but it's the footprint of the public entering my banking halls that really gives me the operational license. I should never take that for granted. And I should pay for that license in one way or another. The public pays for the education of my colleagues in the bank or the staff of Equity Bank. There should be a way of recognizing that I'm using resources that have developed by the public, and I should, in one way or another, have a return to the public that invested in me having those resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. Just to pick up on your final comment in terms of the idea of lobbying, especially given that one of the key objectives of this webinar is to really cut across the borders and look at some key learnings. Peggy Sue, I'd like to bring this back to you because in your reaction to Dr. Mwangi's keynote initially, you mentioned about some of the collaborations that are between the private sector and government. What key learnings can we take from any of the initiatives that have been rolled out, really looking at inclusivity in terms of the private sector dialogue with government? Is there anything that we can learn from that experience? Peggy Sue?
Satina, if I jump before Peggy comes in so that I can complicate. My understanding about lobbying, the best lobbying is not to lobby from outside, it's to lobby from inside. The biggest influence I ever had in the Kenyan society was when I accepted to be the chairman of Kenya Vision 2030 from 2007 to 2019. I became an insider, not just lobbying, but pushing and implementing. Then I became a chancellor of Meru University of Science and Technology. And I could go because I've not applied for the job to say, this policy is not good, this is not enabling, this is not right. And today I'm the chairman of Kenya COVID-19 Response Fund and chair the health committee. I'm able to say for us to do, we need this policy. So essentially, let's lobby from within. Let's offer to give back to society and provide. The door is not shut for us in the private sector to be insiders through voluntary commitment. And then we stop complaining and whining, and we become part of the drivers. It's our government after all. Thank you.
Absolutely, Dr. James. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. Peggy, anything to add to that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Santina. I can't agree more with Dr. Mwangi. And I think for me, what COVID-19 has really put into sharp focus, not only for organizations, but for all of us, I think society at large, is just to thrive to be truly human. And so if I bring it back into financial services, whether you're providing services, solutions, opportunities for clients and employees, we need to, who need to achieve growth, prosperity, and fulfillment. It has to be done in a collaborative way. You have to collaborate with each other. And it's so important. And if I think about lobbying and partnerships, private sector, public sector partnerships, the one that is a flagship in South Africa, and I think one that we did really well, is when we did the renewable energy, program. It's probably one of the best in the world. And I think I was very privileged to work with as part of the teams that was financing some of those deals that we were seeing coming from that program. And I think what was encouraging for me was also to see the role of women renewable energy enterprises play a role in this space. But government's voice around making sure that, yes, we've got a policy framework, we've got a regulation framework, and we want to see transformation, and we want to see transformation from a gender perspective. They had to bring that voice, and we needed to lobby, obviously, as private sector to make sure that they, you know, the commitments that they make really become real and are realized through that program. So it is possible, and I do agree that we need to lobby from within. These our government. I don't think that you can separate the public and private sector. You need to work together. There has been an era where there was a massive trust deficit between the two sectors, and we need to work increasingly hard to make sure that we bridge that deficit, because we need both parties to come to the table and find solutions and make sure that we continue to build this prosperity and fulfillment for all who live in society, and take everyone along with us. And so the issue around lobbying and making sure that we understand this private-public partnership is very important. And I think there are governments or countries on the continent that have got it right, and there are others where they haven't, and there's room for improvement. And I think in South Africa, whether you look at the renewable energy program, whether you look at Black economic empowerment, again, which was a program that was meant to redress some of the inequalities and just the marginalized issues around Black business, and bringing back, you know, everyone into the, you know, into the play of becoming a participant in the mainstream economy. Those are very important programs, and we need to make sure that, you know, we continue to lobby to make sure that that transformation and inclusivity continues broadly for society, and it brings everyone into the mainstream.
Thank you very much, Peggy Sue, and also again, Dr. Mwangi, for giving us some insights and maybe some key takeaways in terms of how we can start to address this issue of lobbying. Before I move on, I wanted to open up for a broader panel discussion. We have some additional discussants who've joined us this afternoon. But before I welcome them to maybe react to some of the panel discussions as well as the keynote, I'd like to touch on one question that has been repeatedly coming up, and Peggy Sue, you're still on the spot here. It's with regards to mentorship. You mentioned in your initial comments that mentorship played a key role in your leadership journey. We're seeing that there's a lot of participants on the call this afternoon who are facing challenges in terms of finding mentors. What are some of the spaces in which this you can help address this issue? Maybe not just in South Africa, but what can businesses do more of in terms of addressing the issue of mentorship?
Thank you, Santina. Mentorship is something that is very close to my heart. It's something that I champion and advocate for. And I think one of the things that, you know, this virtual world enables us, and it's just being connected with each other, irrespective of where you are on the global stage. And I think building a network and having a network where you can tap into that network from a support perspective, from a learning perspective. And there are so many networks across the continent that I think, you know, we can all tap into those. I am privileged and honored to be part of, you know, the Desmond Tutu Fellowship program, which connected me to so many of my colleagues across the continent. And it's such a privilege to be part of that network, because when there are issues, burning issues that we all need to bring a voice to, we do take those opportunities to do that. And I think, you know, mentorship for young people is so important. And I think in this time of COVID, one of the things that we've done as well, and I've played quite an important role in it, is to make sure from a small business perspective, small business also need mentorship, because access to information, access to capital, and just really, you know, having access to the things that they need to enable them to run and really succeed in the respective businesses that they start is critical. So we have started a mentorship program for small business within Standard Bank, where we're looking at our commercial clients and banking clients and saying, or business clients, and saying, how do we help you navigate this new space that you find yourself in? How do we make sure that you can really rebuild your businesses? And also from a leadership perspective, I think, men have a very important role to play in terms of, female leadership and mentorship around that female leadership. I have been very privileged to be mentored by very strong men in the industry. I started my career at Investec, and I was mentored for many years by the former group CEO of Investec, Mr. Stephen Kosov, and many others, who have really shaped and molded me into the leader that I am today. And therefore, I truly believe that, we all have a role to play. I think all of us sitting on the panel, I'm sure, would be more than willing to champion a young person and really provide mentorship for them and share experiences of what you go through as a leader. And I think for me, leadership, remains such a critical part of mentorship, because the access that we have, the privileges that we have to access of information and many other channels that people want to be part of those platforms and networks, we can enable that. So I hope that moving away from today, we can still keep in touch and have those channels of communications so that we can see what we as a panel sitting here today through the university, obviously, can play a role in terms of developing mentorship programs for young people.
Fantastic, Peggy Sue. Thank you so much for that. And I think that brings us full circle back to Dr. Njenga. Dr. Njenga, I'd love to really bring it back here. I think Peggy Sue has actually posed a challenge as well. How do we actually now ensure that we continue the dialogue beyond this afternoon? How do we start to address some of the issues that have been raised here? I would start with the mentorship element, because I know that is a key area you touched on in your welcome remarks in terms of how we're going to progress from these CEO dialogues and in terms of broadening across other regions. And then thereafter, I'd also like to welcome you, Dr. Njenga, to maybe address some questions or reactions from the panelists as well. But if we could please follow on with this issue of mentorship. It's been raised as a critical question by attendees this afternoon several times. Karibu, Dr. Njenga.
Thank you, Santina. Mentorship has been very close to my heart, and I've been doing it for more than 25 years. The only thing is that I've been doing that within the university environment, and I can say that about 4 companies have come of the last 15, 20 years because of that mentorship. But I realized at one point or another, we have to be realistic about mentorship. Mentorship is about setting the right structure to mentor, the place where somebody feels safe. And if we are to add the question of inclusivity that Dr. E. James from Equity Bank has mentioned, one of the things that we have to do is to build a structure of networks right to the village level in Africa. Most of the Africans are disconnected from mentorship. And the reason is because they are far, infrastructure, Toyin has said that. Secondly, they have to be connected to what we call the elite spaces, which is very difficult for them. Neither the elite nor the village person wants to connect because there is just such a distance between them. And I think, and this is my humble opinion, what James has said, Mwangi, that some of us have to develop ideas and assist in policy making that will enable that connection happen. If that connection is distant, there is no mentorship. Now, for instance, in the bank with 14 million customers, what do I mean by a network? I mean that Equity Bank can create a pyramidal structure all the way from those who are at the level of the corporate to the youngest SME coming into the bank and create a way in which you may connect these two people, the one who is starting business and the one who has succeeded in business. You have also to select the right people for mentorship. The second thing is mentorship does not exist in a vacuum of good wishes. So Jim has mentioned the thing of policy. If you go down to the various cash crops, minerals in most of Africa, village level enterprise, how many of the people in the village understand the value they're creating for a product or a service? So without proper policy around supply chains and lobbying for, first of all, not the government can do nothing, in my humble opinion, but I leave it to you. It can do a lot in setting the general framework. But how do you go to the community setups? How do you go to all those people who own cattle in the rural areas? How do you go to those people who are mining with their hands? How do you go to the people who are truly excluded? So it's just not a matter of mentorship within a good desire simply to develop somebody's capability, but there must be mentorship along a process. And here I'll give a little example. Because of the agribusiness system we have set up at the business school, we managed to see quite a variety of value chains. One was the rice value chain. The other one was the vegetable value chain, like tomato value chains. The other one was avocado value chains across the country and the region. So we are working with Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and we may go down to Malawi with the avocado value chain. And do you know what happened to that? One of the students who had been mentoring for more than 6 years, a company was set up and a factory was set up. Okay. And I've managed to work with them. Now we are going to a situation where, if all goes well, by December, the company will be stable, quite stable actually. And importing avocado all the way to Ujombe in Tanzania and to Burundi, which is a very difficult environment. Now that was just a little thing to do. I can talk about 5 other companies with that example. But there has to be a connection between the elite person who understands a specific important value chain, and then finally, to concentrate on these guys, show them where the finances come, show them where the weaknesses are, and so on and so forth. So this is very important to me. Mentorship is not in a vacuum. It's within a context of value creation. Now, the second thing is, why don't we now speak about mentoring around a network of Pan-African CEOs who can integrate their ideas to the government, but also to the places where government does not reach, properly speaking. Why do I say the government does not reach? For the simple reason that I discovered most of the government officials have rarely any idea about how to do business or to increase value creation in the network. And if they do, the sad part about this is that they have rent-seeking possibilities. And it is a very sad state of affairs. That has been mentioned ad infinitum. The people whom my hope lies on is you, the CEOs. Until we create a powerful network, Pan-African network, that can lobby policy, until we can connect to what the ordinary African can do in the village, we are not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere. I remember one of the institutions I helped support develop a platform was the Invest in Africa platform. Sadly, I don't now have time to help, but we built almost a platform more than 10,000 small and medium enterprises, and transnational enterprises. And we started linking the value chain so that the ones at the bottom can apply for the tenders. And you have to mentor them how to apply for a tender and what it means to apply for a tender and what value they must give and for how long. because those things are not there. All right. And finally, now I am hopefully going to set up another network structure for mentorship. So my idea has been have an apex institution at the university. That apex institution has to accredit what we may call small business development centers, privately owned, but with collaboration of government and county government. Okay. We accredit them and we give them the training and the curriculum. And sometimes we even send our students there to do the training. Then attached to that is financing. Now, I hope people like my friend James, Dr. Mwagi, listen, money is still very expensive for people, especially when they have to start up or at least set up structures to become resilient or sustainable. I think the government is now working, at least here in Kenya. I don't know about other African countries. We're working a lot on credit guaranteeing system that is linked to know your customer systems, which are database, technology-based. By the way, that idea, James, was very good. How do we decorporationalize data? I think every one of us must go back and think twice about that statement. Please don't sell the data too much. Rather, sell data within a value network. So I have to go. Santina, I am sorry, but that is how I think mentorship will work around this issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Njenga. You continually inspire us. So I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I think really drawing on from what Peggy Sue was saying earlier, that this is not the end, but actually the beginning of ongoing dialogue, this idea of a network of Pan-African CEOs.
Santina, I know I shouldn't speak too much, but with us here is a guy I know who has been working on a different angle of this, but from Rwanda, John Bosco. And really, I'd really like to hear the experience of John Bosco's going back to the SMEs and trying to finance SMEs from the ground, from Rwanda. But I leave it to you to guide what you wish to guide. Madam, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Njenga. So yes, we have some additional contributors, and just in the interest of time, I would request that either reacting specifically to some of the thoughts that have been drawn out this afternoon from the panelists and Dr. Mwangi's keynote, or even specifically in terms of some of the questions that have been coming from our distinguished participants. So I think Dr. Njenga has set it up. I'd like to welcome Mr. Bosco to really share some insights. And if we could keep it to a minute to two as we start to close up our session. Welcome.
Thank you, Santina, and thank you, Dr. Njenga. I think Dr. Njenga is sometimes a mind reader. I'm not going to talk about the Rwandan experience per se, but I'm going to express my thoughts about this subject, especially where Dr. Njenga ended, expensive money. Now, we've talked about, I will certainly commend my colleagues talked about innovation in this space of the financial inclusion. That's absolute that we need to innovate and think differently. One of the things that appears to be coming out all the time in financial inclusion is always access to payment services, which banks do very well, which Equity Bank has done very well in terms of mobile payments and stuff like that, access to credit, access to insurance services and all that. But there's one thing that doesn't seem to be coming out very well, that the cost of capital to SMEs, the cost of money. How do we address the issue of access to capital? Because we all know that the banks are playing a good intermediary role, very good. That's empirical evidence has proved that that's a little bit more expensive. That it's a bit expensive. So how do we make it less expensive? One of the ways I thought about was probably looking at the financial markets, the capital side element of it. Now, the conditions or the requirements for SMEs to list on stock exchanges, to raise capital there, are a bit stringent, especially to African environment. How do we enhance this intermediation of raising capital or raising money for business? How can we make sure that our SMEs can list on stock exchanges and raise capital in a less expensive way? How do we deal with that challenge of the requirements of this capital? How do you teach them how to manage their books very well? For instance, we talked about being flexible or in terms of innovations. How can we make sure that these we don't have requirements like stringent requirements like having audited statements audited by the big fours, for instance, because that's an expense for them. So I think we need to look around that area as well. How we can reduce the cost of capital, how can improve access to capital for our miners, like Dr. Njenga mentioned, for our cattle keepers who want to do business. So I think that's where my thoughts are. I'm going to meet my thoughts to my personal contributions here, not the experience in Rwanda, but I know I can touch on that a bit, that the stock exchange here is trying to look at how we can have an SME platform to list. So that's one way we're doing. Thank you. I'm going to keep it to this. Thank you, Santina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bosco. So we also have Mr. Owen Muzambi, who is the founder and executive director of Driven Development South Africa, just to share your reactions and comments to the panel as well, please.
Thank you so much, Santina. Also, panelists. For this time, I'm just going to contributions to some statements and hopefully leave them as questions as well to the panelists. And our organization is really much an implementation partner, and we build economic inclusion and financial inclusion interventions delivered on the ground in communities in South Africa. But what we have seen is a somewhat hijacking of the financial inclusion. And I guess the question, the title of my contributions will be financial inclusion for whose benefit. I think what some visions we see on there is a rush from financial service providers, to jump on the bandwagon of trying to serve previously underserved communities with new products, new inventions, in the name of we want to impact individuals, in the name of we want to alleviate poverty. But some of the interventions we've seen, we're observing financial entities trying to push products that necessarily have downstream impacts to the community. And so the question that I have for the service provider, the financial services providers that how are we, if we are managing some of our priorities to be, I think Dr. James mentioned very well that private sector, if left to their own, can become very capital. And so do we generally sort of that?
Sorry to interrupt you, Owen. I believe your internet is a little bit unstable. We're not getting you clearly. But I think we've captured the essence. And what I would ask is that as the panelists and Dr. Mwangi are making their final comments, they'll seek to address this as well as the other issue raised by Mr. Bosco. Thank you very much, Owen. I'd now like to welcome Mr. James Wambungu, who is the co-founder and executive director of Solvit, to make some comments and reactions. Karibu, James.
Thank you very much, Santina, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see Dr. Mwangi, Jim, McPhee, and everyone. I think how it has gone this afternoon is very, very good. I think we've captured most of the issues. I think I only want to add on to one thing that has not necessarily been discussed in detail. It's an idea I just want to plant across, especially even for those who are in business. And I think it's also a question that has come up. And this is around using the financial services. I know we've talked about the lower end of the market in terms of inclusion, but even we need the big businesses to be brought to, sort of financial services that enable them to connect their businesses with other businesses in Africa, so that then we can encourage trade across Africa, we can encourage investment, because I think today Africa doesn't trade with itself. And the day Africa begins to trade with itself, like the way the US states trade with each other, or the way the European countries trade with each other, or Asian countries trade with each other, I think then we'll expand the economies of Africa. So someone like Dr. Mwangi with Equity, where they've expanded into a lot of countries, I think we need to present a one solution that enables the businesses to function across borders, even as we work on the other infrastructural things like connecting through roads and railways. That's just the one more idea that I wanted to put across. I think the others have largely been discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. So that's addressed as well to the panelists as part of their closing remarks. Final comments from Mr. Crispin Bouquet, Advisor, Public Policy Research, FIN Africa Inclusion, and then we'll welcome the panelists to make their final remarks. Very Crispin.
Thank you very much, Santina, for this opportunity. I'd like to make two statements, basically to recap some of the ideas that came out from the presentation. First and foremost, I'd like to state that, of course, from Dr. Mwangi's presentation, it becomes very clear that financial inclusion is fundamentally a problem of distribution. And as such, one of the biggest challenges banking institutions are confronted with in advancing financial inclusion, especially in Africa, is what we economists call the triple whammy of very low savings balances that are normally held in the accounts of the low income people, the very small transaction sizes, which are very expensive for most banks, and of course, the large number of customers. I think the challenge most banking institutions are confronted with and will continue to be confronted with unless they solve those problems is to come up with innovative business models which they deploy to enable them do business with the low income households and the SMEs without necessarily passing the cost of access to finance or the cost of financial inclusion to the customers. I think that's very important. And the second point I'd like to underline, which is actually what Dr. Mwangi made very, very strongly and which was underlined by Dr. McPhee, is basically the point that savings mobilization is the foundation of financial inclusion. And therefore, we should not necessarily talk about credit or rather even payments, because when you look at the most commercial banks, when you look at their balance sheets, you will see that credit and payments are the drivers of their profitability. But we want to look towards a situation where savings mobilization, even the very small savings, become part of the drivers of the profitability of commercial banks. Thank you very much for those for the opportunity and those two comments.
Thank you very much, Crispin. So now I'd like to welcome back our panelists for the closing remarks, taking into consideration some of the additional challenges that have been posed and looking to address those in the final comments. I'd like to welcome Toyin with the closing remarks.
Thank you, Santina. And in closing, I would like to address some of the concerns that were raised by John Bosco, specifically with respect to provision of ready and more accessible capital for some of our SMEs through our exchanges. And to say what we have observed here in our market is that as more competition is being introduced to the bourses and the capital trade points, we find out that the bourses are becoming more innovative. And so we have the Nigerian Stock Exchange coming up with a growth board that was dedicated to smaller companies and with a lower entry requirements and lower listing requirements. And we also have dedicated capital trade points, such as the NASD in Nigeria, that is actually dedicated for the smaller companies that would not meet the standard listing criteria of a Nigerian Stock Exchange. So those are some of the initiatives that will resolve those kind of changes. We think those kind of initiatives should go across markets. I think for providers of financial services, we need to look at ourselves, go beyond just providing money, but becoming partners for smaller businesses to help them steer their way across the COVID-19 challenges. A lot of these businesses, their survival is in doubt unless they get advice. So we at Emerging Africa Capital are looking at ourselves as partners, advisors, and corporate mentors to help these companies to restructure and reorganize themselves and find new ways to operate, in the wake of COVID-19. And that's the kind of approach that I think financial institutions need to have so that we can be enduring partners to smaller businesses. Remember that these SMEs still provide 60 to 70% of the jobs across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyin. Dr. Jim McPhee, some final closing remarks from you, please.
Aware of the fact that COVID-19 is going to change many things. And I think we've got to just be very, very sensitive to realize that the way the economy is running is going to change. For example, one of the big 4 firms in Nairobi has given up one of its floors in the building that it rents because it now realizes that people can work from home. Yesterday, we had the African Accounting and Finance Association annual general meeting. 85 people attended it from the whole of Africa. We had a conference this year. The income was only $2,186, as opposed to last year it was $33,358. But we operated at a surplus this year, and we also operated as a surplus last year, but it cost us far less. So we have to use the COVID-19 learning process to realize that we've got to do business in a different way. And, our suppliers, very often, they won't be as well off as they were previously because everyone has had a hit in their income. I spoke about Zoom, obviously. That's, and Amazon employed an additional 100,000 people, but that's the exception to the rule. So what we've got to understand, I think, is we've got to be very perceptive about what changes are going to take place. And we have to make sure that we change our businesses to adopt those new methods of working. That's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. McPhee. Peggy Sukumalo, final comments and remarks from you, please.
Thank you, Santina. Look, I can't agree more. I think, what COVID has done, if you're in financial services, I think as much as we are all thriving to be digitally enabled and really drive digital innovation with fintechs and all the partners that we can bring on board, we need to be truly human. I think our customers and clients are demanding of us to be human. So the days of just treating a customer as Mr. or Mrs. X are gone. You need to show compassion. You need to actually show up and be authentic in how you provide your service, be authentic in terms of how you engage with your customers. So I think for me, we really have to lean in and make sure that as financial services, this narrative around inclusivity, we really activate and understand really what does that mean and how do we take the whole of society with us. And yes, we're all running businesses from a commercial perspective, but we need to just be aware that at all times, we also have a social responsibility. We have a social, change that we need to make sure happens in this particular industry. So I do think that COVID has given us a watershed moment. I think first, whether for school, work, health, or keeping in touch with our family and friends, we've realized the deep value of digital technologies. Second, the appetite for change has significantly grown. And we've all touched on that, and we've seen it, and we've seen the disruptions and the impact it's had on business. So I would like to say that as we urgently reset, Africa's economic foundations, we need to make sure that we do that in the framework for thriving for a more equitable, more resilient, and really prosperous future for everyone.
Thank you very much, Peggy Sue. And finally, and definitely not least, Dr. James Mwangi, for your final observations, comments, distinguished panel this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Particularly, let me respond to the excellent additions that has been put by the audience that you gave an opportunity. I think the issue of savings is very, very central to inclusion. When you look at financial inclusion worldwide, 60% of population above 15 years is classified to be included. But when you look at savings inclusion, the same population, only 27% of the people above 15 years have a saving culture and have a saving product. Essentially, the world is not going to be developed by anything else other than credit and savings. Savings generate resources for investments, and investments generates opportunities. The story of credit starts with the savings. Banks don't take the ownership risk, they take the credit risk. For you to be given credit, you have to show skin in the game. You must have an ownership of the investment, and banks then add to the investment through a credit decision. And that is why we must think differently how to build a saving culture so that that takes care of the equity portion of business. And then banks can then provide credit. But I think the issue of distribution is what has been the biggest challenge. Maybe the secret of equity will be out today. The success of equity is because it's a savings-led model. Pure. Although all those who know, the 14 million people save with Equity Bank and only 1 million borrow from equity. We are a facilitator. We are a safe, secure place or the safe harbor that people can trust with their savings. To make savings possible, we had to remove all the barriers of saving. We had to remove things like ledger fee, account opening balance, minimum balance, restriction on access to liquidity, both on amount and frequency. Give freedom to that liquidity, and then enable payments, and then bring ease. And those who knows, our innovations have been led by building the infrastructure for the saving culture. Whether it is the mobile banking platform, it's purely to enable the saver from the remote. Prior to that, it was mobile on 4 wheels. We had Land Rovers going to villages, every village once in a week, taking banking services to the people and bridging the last mile. I think the issue of James Wambugu, my friend, about cross-border trade, yes, But nobody would have expected Africa to be successful on cross-border trade because in the first place, there was no physical infrastructure. The hard infrastructure is almost non-existent. You can't cross from East to West Africa. There is no rails, there are no roads, and even air. It's only a recent event that we have 2 or 3 airlines now in Africa that have been able to connect Africa. Air at this age and era. The second thing was the soft infrastructure. Things like banking. We didn't have financial infrastructure that crisscross. It's only now that we have the West African banks and the South African banks spreading their wings around the continent and helping complete cross-border transactions. Cross-border transactions require trade finance facilitation and trade finance facilitation. As we do it today, we in Africa, in East Africa, originate for a transaction with West Africa, and a European bank in Europe confirms to the bank in West Africa. That is the tragedy of the soft infrastructure. The other worst soft infrastructure was policies. We talk about the East African community, but you find more barriers to trade within the East African community, whether it's physical barriers or policy barriers. So our pronouncements are not supported by the soft infrastructure that is required. There was a question of inclusion for who? Who is to benefit? Inclusion builds the pie for all. So it is benefit for all because inclusion brings everybody on the table, allocate people resources on their ability, their need, and their dreams. And then they create a big economic pie for all of us. And we take from the economic pie based on how we position ourselves. So it is inclusion for the benefit of all. And lastly is that sensitive and always emotional question about cost of finance. I think the reality is that the cost of finance is determined by the structure of our economies. The biggest driver of, I would say, financial exclusion has been our own governments. Let's take, for instance, Kenya. The government caps interest rates at 13 to the private sector and then offers an infrastructure board at 12.5, which is tax-free. So the actual yield on a tax-free board at 12.5% is 16. So simply, the government has crowded out completely the private sector. That is what really drives inconsistent policies that are not really talking to each other. They are not in tandem. They become the friction in the economy and really the biggest disabler. The second one is when you have risk-free interest rates. In Kenya, a 3-year board, we can talk of a 3-year board because Reading assumed 3 years, is already 12% to 10%. So you take that as risk-free. So you can't lend below there. And then you have depositors who have the option of buying a board at 10% are the ones the banks are competing for funding. So you offer them 10 because the government offers them 10. Then inflation in Kenya is 5%. So the real return to that depositor is not 10, it's 10 minus the inflation. So it's at 5. So you can start seeing the problem that you don't even create an enabling environment for a saving culture or an intermediation culture because of those two parameters not being consistent. So once you add inflation to risk-free, the interest rate, the minimum interest rate is 15%. You can say it's high, but that is the structure of our economy. That would be the minimum interest rate you could be able to provide in Kenya. Not a decision of the bank, but the setup of the structure of our economy. Lastly, let me make one major appeal that we who are on this platform should really be champions of really a new norm, a new world, where we recalibrate the world with the lessons and the insights we have got from COVID and create a more sustainable world by furthering inclusion, ensuring nobody is left behind. And the only way is not to look at government, is to look at the private sector, and private sector adopt what one would call a purpose-driven business model. And the business, the purpose should be driven by ethical practices that ensured that there is shared prosperity in the world for the sake of sustainability of the world. Thank you very much, Satina, for giving us a great opportunity and being a great moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mwangi. I think you have really challenged all of us here today, those who are participants, but also on the panel, to really drive the dialogue forward. I think this is, again, just the beginning, and I challenge also Dr. Njenga to continue to really bring us together through such platforms. I know we're slightly over time, so I'd just really like to now welcome Dr. Angela Ndunge, who is the Deputy Dean at Strathmore University Business School, to deliver the final remarks. And thank you so much to such a wonderful panelists, such great insights shared this afternoon. Asanteni sana. Dr. Angela.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Santina. In the interest of time, we'll just keep it brief. So I first want to sincerely appreciate you as our moderator. I think you have really ensured that this afternoon has been quite enriching and engaging. So thank you so much for the amount of time and effort that you put in to make sure that this event is a success. I also want to give my appreciation to the panelists and as well. They've all spared time to be here. Different parts of Africa, as you can see, we are intentionally bringing the Africans from different parts of this continent so that we can begin to have those conversations that matter and break the barriers, the artificial barriers that are making business difficult amongst ourselves. I'd also like to recognize the Strathmore University management and the Strathmore Business School management, represented by Dr. Njenga as well, just for the continued support, and also for Dr. Njenga and his leadership and being here again. This has been his dream, and we are working to ensure that even the new generation is also articulating the important issues that are facing this beautiful continent of ours. I'd like also to recognize the team that was behind the scenes organizing. They spent many sleepless nights trying to think around this concept. So just quick mention, Eda, Shadrach, Rosemary, Stephen Kiror, team from Tiki, our marketing team, IT, all of you, much love, because you have really spent a lot of time to make sure that this event runs smoothly. So we really appreciate you. Just as a way of concluding, just saying that Strathmore University Business School is, of course, committed to ensuring that the conversations that are happening here are just not left at this point. We are having another CEO dialogue. It will be on 1st October, and the topic will be economic recovery and focusing on creating value through private-public partnerships. So we hope all of you who are here, our distinguished guests, will be able to join us, and we thank you for making time to be here. Just as parting shot, I liked the remarks that were made by Dr. James Mwangi around furthering inclusion. Let us continue to work as leaders just to be more intentional about that. And I'm sure in the next 1 year, when we look behind, we should be able to see how have we made a difference beyond this particular platform that we have had. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. We look forward to seeing you 1st of October.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks.